Have you ever wondered why Germans don't buy houses? Well, in this video, we're gonna find out. Let's react.
I'm a German who has been living in the US for a little over 5 years now, and last year I even bought a house here. Something that I definitely wouldn't have done if I had stayed in Germany. Why, you ask? Here's the answer.
Interesting.
Hello, servus, and welcome back to my YouTube channel. My name is Feli. I'm originally from Munich, Germany, but I've been living here in Cincinnati, Ohio, on and off since 2016. And as I just mentioned,
Well, probably property in Munich is much expensiver than in Cincinnati. This is one of the reasons, I guess.
in the intro, I even bought
Another thing is taxes, probably they are smaller. But this is just a wild guess.
a house here last fall, which makes me the first one out of all of my German friends to do that, and probably even the first one who has even thought about it. Here in the US, however, I have plenty of friends my age who own their own home. I feel like it's quite normal here to buy a house, even at a younger age, and pay off the mortgage instead of paying rent. And in a lot of cases, people just sell their houses again after a few years and move somewhere else, or simply upgrade to something nicer. Germany, on the other hand, is known as a nation of renters. I know that this comes as quite a surprise to most people, but more than half of all Germans actually live in a rented place, and only about 45% of Germans live in a place that they or someone else in the household own. Now, the reason why this is
I wonder why. Is it because it's just too expensive, or people are afraid of risks of taking mortgage? Me personally, I don't like mortgages. I don't like debt. And thinking that I have debt like 100,000, 200,000 that I have to pay for 20 years doesn't feel very good.
so surprising is that Germany is the country with the biggest economy in Europe and one of the biggest ones in the world. So naturally, you would think that a wealthy country like this has plenty of people that own their own real estate. But the truth is, Germany actually ranks among the last places in the developed world when it comes to home ownership rates. Out of all European countries, only Switzerland has a lower rate than us.
Don't lie. Latvia is lower rate than you, but that's for sure. It's Latvia is not even in this list.
These numbers are a little bit older.
It's
Most
lies.
of these countries don't release new numbers regularly, but it really hasn't changed all that much. Germany is still in that same rank today, so it's a helpful graphic to visualize the differences. But how does this make sense? How does a wealthy country like Germany have a lower homeownership rate than poorer countries such as Spain, Greece, or Mexico? Let's talk about it. So, of course, it's not like no German in the entire country owns a house. The title of this video is obviously somewhat of an exaggeration. I personally grew up in a residential neighborhood in Munich where most people did own their homes. Granted, the majority of those houses were row houses or duplexes with a rather small yard where only a thin fence is dividing you from your neighbor's patio and yard, but even that is
You need to be in very good relationship with your neighbors if you own this kind of house. If you have bad relationships, I feel for you. I literally feel for you.
already a pretty big luxury in a large German city like Munich, because we generally don't have as much space as people do here in the US, where it's standard to have a standalone house with a front yard, backyard, and your own garage or driveway.
Famous American dream, yeah?
If you want to hear more about how German and American houses are different, you can check out this video, by the way. It's linked up here. But we're going to stick with home ownership versus renting today. And in Munich, which is one of the most densely populated and expensive cities in Germany, you'd have to pay a fortune to get something like what I just described as standard in the US.
I can imagine.
Even buying a 2-bedroom apartment in Munich costs more than a 5-bedroom house here in Cincinnati. But that's just a side note.
As far as I'm concerned, Munich is the most expensive territory of Germany. This is what I heard from all the videos.
Because that's not actually the reason for the low home ownership
Region, not territory, okay?
rate in Germany. And of course, Munich and Cincinnati are two cities that you can't really compare price-wise. It's just a little glimpse into my personal reality when looking at where I'm from and where I live now and what I can afford here. But first, let's look at the facts. As I just said, the majority of all Germans live in a rental property, and that applies especially to younger and older people. According to this survey by the Deutsche Bundesbank from 2017, it's about 85% of the 25 to 34-year-olds who rent their home, 71% of the 35 to 44-year-olds, and 52% of those over 75. So the highest homeowner rates are among the people between 45 and 74. And
Let me know in comment section, are you renting or you have your own place?
That age group, the homeowner rate is at 54 to 60%, so more than half of all people in that age group do own their own home, and only 40 to 46% are renters. Over the last 10 years, the homeownership rate in Germany has only slightly increased, by the way. The homeownership rate also varies within Germany and is different from state to state, with the highest rate of about 65% in the Saarland and the lowest rate of 17% in Berlin. What's interesting is that overall, there are fewer homeowners in the so-called new states of Germany, Neue Bundesländer, so in former East Germany, than in West German states, which seems to be a remnant from the GDR. About 90% of all rental units
Maybe because of economy, there's like different economy in these parts of Germany.
in Germany are located in multi-family homes. That's a very common type of building that you'll see all over the country, in historical districts, in newly built neighborhoods, in the city centers, and in the suburbs. Eastern Germany is even known for a specific type of multi-family building called Plattenbau. Those buildings consist of prefabricated concrete sheets, Platten, and were mainly used to build quick and cheap housing after World War II.
We have them also, it's called panelные дома.
But you'll find these buildings in other parts of Germany as well.
From panels, made from panels, very
now
cheap.
Let's get to the reasons as to why the homeownership rate in Germany is so low. I did mention that real estate prices in Munich are extremely high, so you might think, well, duh, houses are just a lot more expensive in Germany than in other countries, so fewer people can afford buying a house. But actually, even though in some cities, such as Munich, but also Hamburg or Frankfurt, real estate prices are indeed very high, the average house in Germany only costs around 320,000 euros. Or at least that's the only number that I could find for a nationwide average, because the prices are usually listed per city and not for the entire country. And
I wouldn't say it's so expensive if you take in consideration that Germany has a very good economy and the people have very good wages. This is the price of the house usually you get here in Latvia also, like 320, 200,000.
According to this article by the German news outlet Focus, when you compare the average price for 1 square meter of real estate to the average household income in Germany, the rate is actually very similar to other countries. So an average household in Germany could purchase about 4 square meters of real estate with their yearly net income. That's actually the 5th best rate in the European Union. In many other countries, the average household can afford way less than that. Yet they do own more real estate than Germans, and one reason for that is that you don't necessarily have to purchase a home to own it. You can also inherit it. And that's something that just doesn't take place quite as much in Germany. About half of all German homeowners are currently paying off a mortgage, which indicates that they bought the house themselves. While in Romania, the country with the highest homeownership rate in the world, only about 1% of owners pay off a mortgage. Why is that? Well,
because in Romania the taxes are crazy and the wages are so small. I talked with a couple of guys from Romania and they were not happy about the economical situation there.
There simply isn't quite as much to inherit in Germany, which of course has historical reasons. About 20% of all German housing stock was destroyed during World War II, about 2.3 million homes.
I never thought about it.
An additional 2 million were damaged, and including the refugees from the Eastern occupation zone, about 21 million people needed a home. So in the first few years after the war, West Germany needed to come up with a plan to provide a lot of housing, about 5.5 million homes to be exact, as quickly as possible. And they had to do it in the midst of a broken economy, with the currency being virtually worthless and a population who didn't have a lot of financial means. The best way to solve the situation was to build government-subsidized social housing in the form of apartment units that people could rent for a reasonable price. The first housing program started right after the end of the war, when there wasn't even an official state and government in place yet, but shortly after the Federal Republic of Germany was officially founded in 1949, the government did also pass the first housing law, Wohnungsbaugesetz, with the goal of having as many people as possible benefit from this. The government ended up funding about 3.3 million homes. 2.7 million were built by private investors that were given access to subsidies, low interest rates, and tax breaks. And so Germany managed to cut the housing shortage in half by 1956. And due to the fact that there wasn't really a high demand for private real estate at the time because of the financial situation, banks were hard hardly giving out loans and multifamily homes could house more people, most of those newly built homes were rentals. The foundation for Germany's preference to rent was laid. Other countries that were affected by the war, such as the United Kingdom, for example, actually had similar strategies after the war. Still, today, the home ownership rate in the UK.
Well, in the United Kingdom, there was not so much destruction after the World War if you compare it to Germany, and I bet there was a lot of home ownership, a lot more home ownership than in Germany, just because of that.
Is significantly higher, with about 65%. In 2004, it was up even more. So the big question is, why did the Germans stick with renting, even after the economy recovered and the country experienced the so-called Wirtschaftswunder in the 1950s? One of the answers seems to lie in how much money was put into rentals. Since the UK mainly targeted their housing programs at public and non-profit institutions, excluding the private sector, and kept up renting and construction cost caps for public housing developers, most rental property was of significantly lower quality than privately owned homes because landlords had to cut back in maintenance. As a result, rentals in the UK, especially those that were largely publicly funded, acquired somewhat of a stigma. In Germany, on the other hand, rental regulations were reduced much sooner, in the early 1960s, and the policies were more balanced between the private and the public sector, so that rental housing has stayed of relatively high quality in Germany and is oftentimes nicer than privately owned places in countries like Croatia, Slovakia, or Romania. Which goes to show that owning your own home doesn't always necessarily equal a better housing quality. And German renters seem to be very happy. According to a 2007 survey by the OECD, more than 93% of Germans said that they were satisfied with their current housing situation. One factor that probably contributes to that satisfaction is that there are a lot of regulations in place to protect tenants in Germany. This includes rent caps that limit rent increases to no more than 20% over a 3-year period. In some cities, it's even 15%. In cities with a particularly tight housing market, we also have a so-called rent price brake since 2015, a rent control, Mietpreisbremse, that keeps landlords from raising rents unreasonably above the local rent index, Mietspiegel. And turns out that
in Latvia, we have a bit different system. If you sign a contract and it's like 250 euros for a flat, you can rent for 250, you can rent for 5 years for the same price, something like that. Not everybody, especially people who are older, who rent their flats, not everybody is raising the prices with the time. They just keep the same price as it was before.
rents in Germany are actually cheaper than in many other countries. A one-bedroom apartment in Germany costs about 700 euros a month on average. It's obviously going to be more expensive in a city like Munich, while the nationwide average here in the US for a one-bedroom apartment is at 1,100 US dollars.
In Latvia, it's around 300 euros for a one-bedroom flat. Usually it's studio 300, 350.
In addition to that, leases are usually unlimited in Germany, unlike in the US where a standard lease ends after 1 year, and terminating a lease in Germany comes with quite a few rules, especially on the landlord's end. Both parties usually have to give a 3-month notice, unless the lease agreement says otherwise, and if tenants have lived in the place for over 5 years, the landlord even has to notify them 6 or even 9 months before. Also,
how much does a landlord have to pay the tax for renting his flat out to somebody? Because here in Riga, it's around 10%, but a lot of people don't pay. They just make fake contracts with the renters, and that's it, and you can do whatever you want. And of course, he can call police every time and say, look, these people are in my flat, just throw them out. But nobody does it, of course. But yeah, So
landlords can't terminate a lease without having a good reason. That can include the tenant being late with their payments, of course, but also when the landlord needs the place to live in it themselves or for family. That's called Eigenbedarf. They do have to show evidence of this need, though, and they can't terminate the lease when they want to sell the place.
See, I have 5 kids, 5. Look at them. We need this flat. We need it to live there.
So landlords are often pretty restricted when wanting to end a lease and often have to overcome a lot of obstacles, which means that tenants don't have to worry about just being kicked out at any given time. And that provides a lot of extra security. Now, besides all of the upsides of renting in Germany, the German government also just doesn't provide as many incentives to buy your own home as other countries do. Even though there is a homeowner program, the KfW Wohneigentumsprogramm, that gives people who want to buy or build their own home.
That's a long name for a program. Wohneigentumsprogramm, man. I can break my tongue while reading this.
Access to low interest loans, it doesn't seem to be enough for people to buy more real estate and even out the lack in tax breaks. Because unlike other countries, Germany doesn't allow you to deduct your mortgage interest payments from your taxes, unless you rent the place out instead of living in it yourself, which then again encourages the renters market more. Also, German banks are generally a little more conservative when giving out mortgages and often require a 20% down payment, while in the UK, you usually only need 5 or 10%, and in the US, you can get a mortgage with a down payment as low as 3%, or in some cases, even 0. At the end
we have like around 10 to 15%. Usually 15.
Of the day, this just keeps the threshold of entering the real estate market a little higher than in other countries, and especially excludes people with a lower income. What's also pretty high by international standards are the transaction costs for home purchases in Germany, which makes buying a home and especially frequent moves less attractive. Last but not least, as this article points out, the low homeownership rate in Germany probably also goes back to mentality differences. In most countries, owning your own property is a life goal for many people with a pretty high priority. George W. Bush promised his voters to make the US a homeowner society, for example, and when Brits say things like, "My home is my castle," you can tell that they idealize the idea of owning their own home as well. Meanwhile, according to the article and my personal experience, most Germans are a little more hesitant when it comes to buying real estate and taking out loans, and with the good renter conditions in the country, renting just seems like a very responsible and reasonable thing to do.
There are benefits to renting, and there are pros and cons, pros that you rent and you can move out whenever you want, basically like in Germany, for example, with 3 months notice, and go somewhere else, but for example, the money you pay, it doesn't go for your flat, if for example, if you take a mortgage, this money would go for your flat, and with time you would buy it out. So while renting, you are more mobile.
And that actually lines up perfectly with my personal experience. I kind of mentioned this at the beginning of the video, but I feel like buying a house in Germany is just considered a much bigger step than it is here in the US. It's more like this intimidating adult thing that younger people honestly don't really talk about a lot, even in your 20s, because it's not really a realistic option for most of us. It's something that's way down the road or might never be reality for us. Now, of course, I grew up in a big, expensive city. This is definitely a little bit different in rural areas. But I think it's safe to say that buying a house is just a big decision and a big step for Germans, and I experienced the different reactions when I bought my house last year. While most of my American friends were simply excited for me, many of my German friends looked at it as this huge milestone and couldn't even believe that I was able to do this and how easy the process was here. Americans really make this whole house purchasing process seem like the most casual everyday activity. My realtor even told me that she never had a client that asked as many questions as I did, even though from a German perspective, I really just did what everyone who's about to make a big decision like this should do. But she said that
yeah, that's normal. You wanna ask questions. If you don't wanna ask questions, you can make a mistake. You don't wanna make a mistake when you buy some property over 100,000, any property, you wanna find out everything you need to find out, and it's normal.
Most of her clients usually just want her to handle everything and don't really care to understand all of the details themselves.
This is Americans, literally. I have seen it in UK and in America.
The signing of the final purchasing contract took me like 15 minutes. In Germany, I know from my parents that usually takes over an hour because they'll read the entire contract to you.
Yes.
Here, they just summarized the contract for me and had me sign the different pages. I also feel like for Germans who could technically afford it, buying a house isn't even on the table usually until they're sure that they want to stay at that place for a long time, and until then, they rent. You wouldn't really buy a house in Germany when you already know that you're going to move again in a few years. Buying a house is something much more permanent to us. In general, Germans only move 4 to 5 times in their lives, while Americans move more than 11 times on average.
That's
With
crazy.
the yearly leases here in the US, especially younger people
But Latvians like me move like around 9 times, so I'm very close to Americans.
often choose to move every year instead of extending their lease, and even for families, it's normal to move every now and then. And as I said earlier, just sell your house and buy a new one. So to answer the question of the video, the reasons as to why Germany has a lower home ownership rate than most other developed countries in the world are a combination of the country's history and rebuilding process after World War II, the high quality of rental housing, relatively low rents, the high renters protection, low incentives for homeowners, and probably a little bit of our mentality. If you want to read more about this topic, I linked all of my sources and articles that I used for my research in the info box below.
For now, I am renting my place, and I have been renting for 15 years or something like that. I know I could buy my own place for that time, but in the same time, at least I lived in different places in different countries. So it was a kind of interesting experience. But overall, I don't wanna take a mortgage. Really, I just don't wanna. It's just too fearful, to have this debt of 100,000 of that you have to pay 20, 30 years. Man, this is depressing, really depressing. So for now, just keeping up with the renting, and see you next reaction videos. Bye.